Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud. All about humanity, so this right here for everyone. Uplift, amplify, empower everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud.
On this episode of the Sumud podcast, we uplift, empower, and amplify the trailblazing Rula Jebreal. Rula is an award-winning journalist, international best-selling author, and foreign policy analyst renowned for her work on global issues. Her work is deeply rooted in personal experiences and focuses on issues that have shaped her life: the Palestinian struggle, women's rights, the war on terror, and the rise of far-right movements. A big thanks to Zachary Foster for connecting me with Rula. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast wherever you watch or listen, and follow us on social media, either at Sumud Pod or at Sumud Podcast. Rula, welcome.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for the beautiful introduction.
Yeah, my pleasure. Well earned. I want to just level set with you right off the bat. This interview, you're an award-winning journalist. This is sort of like a high school player playing against Messi in soccer or Ronaldo in soccer. So I just want to just make it clear to everybody, I'm sort of out of my depth on this one for sure.
I think you're great. I'm not worried.
I appreciate that. So one thing I'd like to start with, there's so many layers to your story. You're a huge inspiration. But that story of you walking with your father to school, where the soldier had known your father for 6 months, but wanted to pick on and bully your father, took your father's ID, threw it in the mud with the goal of basically embarrassing him.
Humiliating him, yes.
Wanted him to get on his knees, but you didn't let that happen. I'm going to hand it over to you from there.
Thank you very much for having me. And oh my God, what a first question. So I grew up in East Jerusalem, and inside the old city of East Jerusalem, which is, I believe, the most contested piece of territory, and where you have people that for centuries lived together, Christian, Muslim, Jews, etc. And really there was an agreement, historical, ancient agreement that is unwritten, that all the communities accept and embrace each other, because if we exclude one, it's a war on everybody else. That was something that every child in Jerusalem was. Basically, we used to drink that with milk. We were injected in our bloodstream, the whole history of Jerusalem. And it's not a coincidence that, the most important church in Jerusalem, the keys to that church are in the hand of a Muslim family, who actually are my friends. So my father was working for the Aqsa Mosque, and around our neighborhood, which is very close to the Armenian neighborhood, to the Christian neighborhood, it's the Muslim neighborhood, but also it's the Afro-Palestinian neighborhood, meaning all of these incredible immigrants who at the beginning of the century migrated from Africa to go to the Hajj, to do the Hajj in Saudi Arabia. And then from there, they went to Jordan to continue and visit all the holy sites of Islam. And Jerusalem was basically for them the Mecca. So they came to Jerusalem at the beginning of the century. They established themselves there. They married Palestinian women, and they have their offsprings, people like, children like me who grew up from this mixed Palestinian and African descent. And we were the Afro-Palestinians. We're Black, so we're visible. So you can tell that we are Palestinians. Before you can tell about, maybe if you look at some of the pictures of Palestinians from Gaza, they're all blonde, or like there's a huge component of them that are blonde and blue eyes. So Palestinians actually are more multiracial and multi-ethnic population, because for a long century we mingled with our nations. Anyways, my father, who was frail, very frail, he had cancer, he had leukemia, and his body was shrinking, but he would insist to take us to school in the morning. And sometimes I could see that he was too tired, exhausted. And I could see, because of the therapies he was making, like his body, his bones, and you can see the veins in his hands. You can see, how exhausted. And I remember it just, especially in the morning, it was hardest on him. But also I remember when they start putting guards around our neighborhood, we felt that our neighborhood that was always open, always welcoming, because it's very next to one of the main doors to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, right? And it's Bab al-Majlis, it's called, our neighborhood. And my father used to work as a guardian in the Aqsa Mosque. He actually designed the garden. So many of the hundreds of the olive trees that you see inside the mosque actually were planted by my father, my uncle, my cousins. As he got older, he married at a very old age, and he had me and my sister, Rania, and he would take us to school, insist to take us to the kindergarten, to school, whatever. So I was really a child, 8-year-old. And I remember very well that morning was a difficult morning for him. It was a February, so it's like a bit rainy. There was mud in the streets. But I remember seeing that the same soldiers rotating. So you have group in the morning, you have a group in the afternoon. But you remember the name, the faces. And I remember one of the soldiers would whisper when especially the women would pass by, which the N-word, it's basically an insult to the Afro-Palestinian women. And I remember it was the first time I asked my cousin, I was like, what does that mean? And my cousin said, it's the N-word. And in the beginning, she wouldn't answer, but then he started making the faces of the monkeys and like all the things like, and I was like, then I understood what Koshim meant. But there was something deeply disturbing in the way they wanted to humiliate my father. So my father was this tall man who was wearing always, in the winter especially, a black jalaba and a jacket on top of it. And I remember we were walking very slowly, and then the soldier stopped us in front of our neighborhood, at the beginning of the neighborhood. He knew all the people from the neighborhood. They know exactly who is who and whatever. They've been there for a while. And it's very close to Ariel Sharon's house. Ariel Sharon, in the late 80s, decided to buy his own house in the middle of our neighborhood. Our neighborhood's like all Arab neighborhood. And the first thing he put, 3 meters flag, an Israeli flag, in the middle of our neighborhood. For us, Ariel Sharon was the butcher of Beirut, was the guy that carried out Sabra Shatila. So all the kids in the neighborhood were like outraged. And anyway, but they from that moment on, we had checkpoints inside the old city all around our neighborhood. And I remember that morning he would ask my father for his ID. My father gave him the ID, which for me was weird. Like, the man, you saw him many times. You never ask IDs inside the neighborhood. But he could see that we were in a rush, in a hurry, and we have school bags, etc. And I think he saw that my father was struggling that morning. Exactly like I noticed, probably he noticed. And he took his IDs, kept as if he was reading. Clearly he was not reading. And then he pretended that that it fell from his hand. And he kept looking at my father's eyes, like, are you going to kneel and grab it? And I think there was a moment of shock in my father's eyes. It was like a moment of realization. This is an armed soldier in his 20s. My father is an old and sick man holding the hands of his daughters. I think he was assessing, how is this guy going to act next? What is the level of threat to himself and to his daughter? I don't think he was beyond the humiliation. He understood their psyche for a long time. What I did in that moment, I summoned my courage. I didn't want my father to kneel. I've been helping him while we were home because of his disease, basically sometimes move from his bed, especially after the therapies, from his bed to the kitchen or to his rug where he used to pray. So immediately I took the things, I gave it to my father. I cleaned it with I remember on my, in my dress, the school dress, and I gave it to uniform, and I gave it to my father. I said, we need to go, we're late. And I somehow diffused, but I saw the shock in both my father and the soldiers. And we walked, and I remember my father, when we were up to school, he put his hand and he said, the storm makes brave young girls. And I thought, I wasn't brave. I just wanted to react and save my father the humiliation. But then I thought of all the children in East Jerusalem who grew up around these soldiers. And this is the first image we have of our colonizer. The desire to humiliate, subjugate, torture, terrorize was there in my eyes since I was a child. I grew up all around that kind of system. And it stunned me that many of those soldiers didn't even speak Hebrew without an accent. Actually, we spoke Hebrew and Arabic without any accent, but they did. Their accent was an American accent.
Yeah. Did it register at that moment that you're going to try to change the world and you're going to fight against hate and oppression?
No, it was survival. There's moments where you think, I'm going to do this. It's just instinct, right?
Yeah.
I remember there's many moments like this. For example, the moment that really I wanted to fight against hate with all my heart, and I thought, I have to stand up to fascism wherever it is. When I went to a refugee camp called Al Amari. So during the first Intifada, in our school would send us to teach children to read and write because the schools were closed, and Israel would shut down the schools because of the first Intifada, because of the popular uprising against our occupier. And so after our school was in East Jerusalem, and Sheikh Jarrah was built by this incredible woman, Hind Husseini. So when we finished at 1 o'clock, we'd have lunch at 1:30. By 3 o'clock, we're in a bus. And we have a duty. A duty is to go to those refugee camps and teach these children to write and read, and or math or English. And we'd go to Al Amari and other refugee camps around Ramallah and around Bethlehem and other places where people lived in utter misery and total poverty. But then the army will come and destroy their homes. For me, the most shocking thing was when I went, I remember, to one of these refugee camps, and I remember they just, bulldozed the house of a woman who had 3 children. Her husband was killed. Their husband was suspected of being a member of Al-Fatah or something. He was basically killed, and they wanted to punish her and punish her children. So they destroyed her home. I remember this child, and I will never forget his face till the end of my life. His name is Omar. And Omar was sitting on the rubbles of his home with his eyes were watching, the sky. He was lost. And his mom was looking for her medication, for pictures, because they gave them 10 minutes to leave the home and to take whatever they can take. So she took her children, a couple of things, and she left. But she wanted pictures of her late husband. She wanted pictures, and she wanted to recover whatever she would recover. So the people from the refugee camp would help her recover. But I think her 3 children were watching in total disbelief. It was the destruction of the only place of stability for them. That was the occupation. This is when I decided that gutted me to my core, because you have a poor woman. You're not only displaced her from one place to another, because she's actually originally from Jaffa. She ended up in refugee camps. They destroy her house in the refugee camp. They kill her husband. And they blame her for whatever he did, which I don't know what he did. And then they traumatize her children forever. And that's the moment when I decided that kind of injustice need to be fought, because that is fascism. When they are now bombing refugee camps in Jenin, they always done that. When they bombed refugee camps and people in tents, when they dropped 2,000-ton bomb on refugee camps and shatter people bones and hearts and souls and brains and bodies, you understand that the project was always an ethno-religious project of exclusion and purity that was always going to end in genocide. It's always destined to go there. How do I know this? Just look at their textbook, their education system. The way they depict Palestinians, people like me and others, first of all, they teach them of the Holocaust from very young age. And they show them for the first 12 years of their school years that their survival, that these people who died because they were the Nazis, what happened to them in Auschwitz and Dachau, elsewhere. But then the only way they can survive is they oppress those people, the colonized subject, us. And the only way they can survive and they can be safe if we are on our knees, behind bars, behind cages. And ultimately, they managed to make us into the Nazis, to Nazify the whole Palestinian population. And the way they think that they need to deal with their Nazi, trauma is through exterminating Palestinians. I mean, the state of Israel weaponized trauma and fear and legitimate trauma of the Holocaust to basically indoctrinate Israelis today, to tell them what's await us on the other side is concentration camps and death camps. We need to kill before we're killed. That's their mindset. So when I wonder sometimes, how can they not think that killing children, bombing and starving children to death and bragging about it and celebrating the death of thousands of children, which they've done for a long time, or raping children, how can they not think that this is immoral or illegal, or at least it's inhumane, barbaric? The only way they are indoctrinated to do that, because they see us as the Nazis. It's Nazi Germany, and they have a chance to punish the Nazis for what happened to them through World War II.
Just curious, how old were you when you visited that refugee camp?
The first time I was 14.
Okay.
It was during the first Intifada that I visited the refugee camps to teach. But obviously, I came across a lot of refugees because in my school, Dar Tifel, there's a lot, or thousands of girls who grew up in that institution that was founded after 1948. And all of them were refugees. Like 90% of them were refugees. My case from East Jerusalem was the exception. Only 10% were from East Jerusalem. All the others were refugees from Gaza, from Nablus, from Jenin, from Ramallah, from across Palestine.
Mm. And I want to go back to your father and your mother, if that's okay, because when I was reading about your father, it just seemed like he was just a kind, gentle human being, always looking for the best in people and so loving. And I know that you experienced the death of your mother when she had committed suicide. How old were you when that happened?
5.
5. Do you remember hearing the news?
Honestly, I somehow the whole memory of who she is faded away. I don't remember. Obviously, I have the pictures, but without the pictures, I don't remember. I remember my father's face very well. I don't remember my mother, but I remember the discourse because, in our Palestinian reality, basically the women speak. They think children are sleeping, but that they are listening. Children always listen. So I knew something horrible had happened. I remember, my aunts and my cousins whispering about how my mother committed suicide. My mother, had a very troubled upbringing. She grew up in Haifa. She was sexually abused. She was raped at a very young age. And that rape really destroyed her life. That's why I think one of the reasons why I focus also on gender-based violence, rape as a weapon of war. It's just because it indirectly and directly changed our lives. My sisters, my cousins, everybody in my surrounding. And the conversation about rape and and for me, it was part of my journey to becoming a feminist. So when I started in my 20s talking to rape survivors, and then in my 30s visiting Bosnia, or talking to women who were raped from war zones, whether it's Syria, Rwanda, Iraq with the ISIS and others, and then Palestinian women. The Palestinian story was much more secretive because it happened, for example, a lot of children were sexually assaulted during the first Intifada between 87 and 1993, more or less, the Oslo Agreement. They were actually sexually assaulted in East Jerusalem, not in, I don't know, I'm sure in Gaza, but East Jerusalem was very famous for this torture center called Al-Maskoubiya. Al-Maskoubiya, which still exists. Honestly, every time I pass that place, just my skin crawls. Like, it's just a place. I'm sure somebody who would pass next to Abu Ghraib would feel the same. Like, there's symbols, and it still exists, by the way, in East Jerusalem. And I remember when Ariel Sharon bought his house, they start rounding children from age 11, 12, 13, 14, 16, and then like by the hundreds. And for whatever reason, like, oh, somebody touched Ariel Sharon's flag. Somebody maybe burned a candle next to his house. Somebody throw a rock on his house. I'm like, what are you talking about? The house is like it's not like a townhouse where like it's a low. It's very high. You need stairs to go to that house. All the windows were shut, closed. They had bars in front of the windows. There's always soldiers. Like I didn't know what they're talking about. But anyway, it was a way to harass everybody else. I think he stayed in the house a couple of times and that's it. But the house became a military base inside the height of our neighborhood. It was like, I want to stay here. I want to show all of you who I am. And they start arresting these children. And, it's very hard for a child to talk about what happened to him or her. But we had very brave mothers who would take their children to hospitals because, they were bleeding or there's like lacerations or the child will have enough confidence to speak of what happened to him. So we start collecting information about that. And luckily we would be visited by some NGOs, Palestinian NGOs, and tell us, you need to tell the stories. And I wrote about it in my book and my movie, and I was always told by everybody else, like, it's a lie. It never happened. We never commit these crimes. I was like, okay. And I was like, our voice was never believed until one day in March this year, 2024, an official from the State Department, former official, Josh Paul, on CNN, he said that he resigned from the State Department because of the policies in Gaza, that he was in charge of the weapon delivery, and basically he decided to resign because he thought America is violating its own law, the Leahy Law. But he added a piece, which is very important. He said, and we received reports of rape of children, 13-year-old boy in Al-Maskubiya. When I heard it, it was the first time that an American official confirmed what we all knew on national television and confirmed that these reports were basically brought to the administration, to the American government, and the American government decided to ignore them. They covered up for the Israelis and they continue to do so. So when I talk about my mother's story, and just to be clear, she was not raped by the army, by the Israelis. It was a different kind of rape. But still, when we talk about the context of rape and rape as a weapon of war, Israel always used rape as a weapon of war against Palestinians and weaponized their sexuality against them. We knew of cases of homosexuals from refugee camps, whatever. They were spying on them. They were filming them with other people or taking pictures or sending them actual people to recruit them, use their sexuality against them, and recruited them and forced them to collaborate with Israel and forced them to become murderers and kill other people. And I grew up with these stories. I was aware of these stories. And what's happening today in the Stein, the torture camp inside Israel, it basically the policy expanded of rape, and now it is being normalized in Israel to the level and extent that they are debating if to legalize the use of rape as a punishment against Palestinians, whether they're Hamas or not. When you read the report about the State Itman, in the same time that they were debating rape and all, the Israeli army was forced before the Supreme Court to admit how many of the thousands of people they had at the State Itman camp, how many Hamas they had. You know what the answer was? 28. Of the thousands, 28 known Hamas members. That means the hundreds of people they were raping to punish the entire population. They were using rape as a weapon of war to destroy, to humiliate, to break, to erase the Palestinian people, not only physically, but also psychologically. As somebody who worked on the rape as a weapon of war, I can tell you that most survivors, they don't want actually vengeance. They want justice. And the only way is through an independent investigation, what Israel opposed till now. And the only way is to bring the perpetrator to justice. One of the people I interviewed who was raped actually by the Israelis told me that she felt like her body is not her body anymore. That there was a bomb inside of her body, that they shattered her from the inside. And it's not a sex crime, it's a hate crime. And I think we need to be clear about how we frame it. It's meant truly, it's not meant as act of control and dominance only. It's meant to kill you, because the overwhelming majority of people who survive those kind of acts actually do what my mother did, try to commit suicide.
But Rula, nowadays, they just don't care. They're putting it on social media. They're promoting
Yes.
it. You have religious leaders within the Israeli
Yes.
population approving it.
Yes. Yes.
Have we ever seen this before?
I never in my lifetime covering rape as a tool of war. It never happened that you find somebody who brags about it. Not even in Rwanda, where millions of people were raped, by the way. Whenever the rapist was caught, he would deny it. And there is shame that they carried for a long time. This is a new psychosis. This is a new pathology. And we are dealing with a society of psychopaths, literally psychopaths. People who are so brainwashed and weaponized, their trauma weaponized against them. There's one thing that I always remember, and it's something that when you read the history of the Holocaust, you always read about how in concentration camps and many testimonies of people who the Nazis raped them. And you can read slowly interviews of survivors who went back to Israel and talk about that experience. They said, they used me as a woman. And you can see all these experiences and people like really left those camps broken as human beings. But something really also happened where they were fed this idea that this can come back. And the only way to stop it is totally dehumanize, criminalize, and do to the Nazi what they did to you. And I think we're watching this culmination of an ethno-religious project, a colonial project that was not created for the salvation of Jews, but for the salvation of Western interests. It was a colonial project from day one, where the European wanted to get rid of their Jews, and they told them, go to Palestine. Naomi Klein remembers and repeat that Zionism was actually considered an anti-Semitic idea. And the only person that actually opposed the Balfour Declaration, 1917, was a Jewish man, Edwin Montagu. Why? Because the whole idea is like, okay, you don't want us to live in Europe, so we need to go somewhere else and recreate and protect Western interests and recreate the colonial project elsewhere. But then, when fascists and Nazi came to power and established the racial laws and basically brutalized and murdered and committed genocide against the Jews, the idea morphed like, oh, we can be safe only in one place. But then that place had native populations, and they morphed the idea of like, we can be safe only if those are ethnically cleansed. I think we're watching, something that I never seen, because Rwanda didn't have that kind of history. Bosnia didn't have that history. I mean, even the Russians who raped people in Ukraine and in Syria, who we heard about the stories from survivors, but also some of them, the calls were intercepted where they're calling back home saying, I raped these people. But if you would ask them publicly, did you rape somebody? Most of them would deny it. I never seen in my lifetime somebody not only brag about it, admit it, and become a celebrity on national television. This guy who's a rapist is getting the benediction from the rabbi saying, he's blessing him. I think I saw something similar in Bosnia where you had some priests blessing them before the murder. I don't think they were blessing them over the rape. I never seen that in history. Gaza is unleashing a barbarism that will impact us for a generation to come. I don't know how our people are going to survive, but I don't know how the world is not looking at what's happening and thinking, we can close this chapter and go back to normal. There's no normal after this. There's no normal after this. The barbarism that was unleashed in Gaza will not stay in Gaza. They're already expanding it to the West Bank. They're willing to do in the West Bank what they did in Gaza. We're seeing now from end of August what they want to do. And by the way, Netanyahu wants an open-ended war in the Middle East. And I think the main question today is this war will expand to Lebanon. and will expand ultimately against Iran. Direct confrontation. That means it's already a regional war, and that means that those practices and those crimes will be also implemented in Lebanon and elsewhere.
And the U.S. government is just sitting back watching.
No. They're complicit. They're told this is not an Israeli war. This is an Israeli-American-backed war. The weapons are American weapons. The cover-ups is an American cover-up. Let's be clear, the military support is the least of it. The political support, the diplomatic support, the bullying of the ICC and the ICJ, the threatening of countries like South Africa, Chile, Brazil, you name it, the global South. But it is also the one moment in history that America is totally naked and exposed. I really believe we're watching the end of America's hegemony and the whole idea that there is only democracy and the best democracy and rule-based international, all that smoke screen, all that BS, propaganda, it's over. They can never recover from Gaza. Biden policy will be his legacy in Gaza. Blinken, Sullivan, all of these people will leave the White House. They will not be asked about Ukraine or Russia. They will be asked about Gaza. This will haunt them for a generation to come. And I hope the kind of public shaming that will happen to them after will actually resonate for other people who will work in the future administration. Because they need to understand that one day you will leave that office and you will go back into the society and you will want to have speaking engagement. You will be haunted by this everywhere you go.
Yeah. When's the last time you visited Palestine?
I was there last August to bury my aunt, my late aunt, Fadia, who died of cancer.
I'm sorry to hear that. And just to go back to your early childhood, if I understood correctly, your dad was sick, obviously. I think it was cancer,
Yeah.
correct? And
Leukemia.
And so because he was weak and frail, is that the reason he put you in the orphanage, just to sort of give you that support system?
Yes. Also, he knew the orphanage director. They were friends for a long time. He also, he worked in the Aqsa Mosque. So we sometimes have cases of people who are very poor, who couldn't basically keep their children. Many mothers who maybe lost the husbands or were killed or something, so they would ask my dad to help them, put them in the orphanage. And the system was, if you have a member of your family, then in the weekend you can go to visit them. So the orphanage, basically the people who stayed in the orphanage 100% never left, or the kids who don't have any parents. But in our society, you always have a cousin, an uncle, somebody. So you also go to see them. The community is very tight. And I remember every weekend I would bring with me one girl or two girls. So it would be like, a pajama party in our home. And this is how I learned about these refugee camps before I visited. Because, for example, my best friend Khawla and Rima was from Gaza, and she was from Khan Yunis. She actually went back to live in Khan Yunis. I don't know if she's alive or dead. The last time I heard from her was in December, and then I lost every contact. She had 3 kids. She was a feminist. She was an activist. She actually was very connected to an orphanage in Gaza called Amal, Hope, and she would help them. And Khawla is from, and I know if you've heard of this village, we all heard of this village recently. It became because the far right in Israel basically burned down the village. There was a pogrom in this village. So Hawara, I know you have my friends in Hawara and have my friends in Benaya and all of these Palestinian villages in the West Bank where, the settlers would go down and burn the whole village down, just in retaliation and just to erase us from our land.
I mean, you got a scholarship at the age of 19.
Yes.
What did they teach you in that orphanage? I mean, your story is phenomenal. I mean, and obviously, I don't know how many languages you speak at this point. I lost count. How many languages?
5.
5 languages. What did that experience in the orphanage? I know Hind was there, and we could talk about the movie a little bit later as well. But what was that experience like, learning from them?
Well, Hind believed, basically there was an unwritten contract that the orphanage would provide you with an education, which is the only weapon to beat all the odds and the only passport to the future. Hind was building generations of Palestinian women, educating them since 1948, since she herself, her life changed when one morning found in the streets of Jerusalem 55 children. And it's a true story. There was the survivor of the Deir Yassin massacre. The oldest one was 12-year-old. The youngest one was a year and a half old, Fatima. And those kids became her children. And then from that moment on, she transformed her grandfather home in Sheikh Jarrah into the orphanage. And then she bought additional land around it, and from her cousins, from other people. And basically she built an orphanage, a middle school, a high school, kindergarten, and now she has a college. There's a college inside, inside that beautiful, gorgeous space. So we had gardening. We were, doing sports, gardening, taking care of each other. The older one would take care of the younger one. I mean, I was not good at washing babies or young girls. I was good at reading stories. So each one, they would somehow use your own skills as best they can, which forced me to read a lot of books because I need to invent new stories for every class. Every evening I would go to put them to bed, and then I have to create stories and I have to read and whatever. But at age 17, it was the first time I went to Italy. It was the moments where they were negotiating the Oslo Agreement, and the European Union at the time was making these, offering people from the Middle East to apply for scholarships. And the way to apply to the scholarship, you need to learn a little bit about the culture. So you can visit, and they just developed this relationship with many institutions around the Middle East. And the great thing that the orphanage in the summer didn't know what to do with the girls, right? Because there's no school. We're sitting in the orphanage. And by then my dad was dead. And I was like, I would go to Haifa to visit my cousins, but also I wanted to stay with my friends in Jerusalem. And then Hind found a great way. And she said, look, there is this, if you study a little bit of Italian, I will get you somebody to teach you a little bit of the basics. We can get you to be part of a summer camp with Italian kids, and you can learn some Italian. And maybe if you're smart enough, you can go to Italy for a scholarship. Sweden was doing the same. Germany was doing the same. I didn't want to go to Sweden and Germany. I already was fascinated with Italy because one of the books I was reading was basically, written by an Italian author. And I was like, okay, let me, go to Italy. And I went to another 5 girls from my orphanage, and we loved it. We went to Tuscany and Florence and Bologna, and immediately I start, investigating how can I get a scholarship. And they walked me through it. It was the Caritas. The Caritas is a religious organization connected to the Vatican. And they said, this is what you need to do. You finish high school, you do this. We will walk you through it. And truly, it was remarkable, amazing women who were part of an NGO who's connected to the Catholic Church who, brought me to Italy. Except they didn't think I would be studying what I studied. They thought, I should become a doctor to go back and save lives in Palestine, which I hated because I did that for 1 year. I studied medicine 1 year, and I was like, get me out of here. And then I became a journalist. And initially they thought, I don't know how you can find a job. But immediately after, they needed actually people who spoke Arabic and who spoke English, because they had multiple wars. So you had the Bosnian War, then you have the Second Intifada, then you have the War on Terror. And this is, boom, my career basically exploded. So when I see these older women sometimes, and I remind them that they didn't want me to become a journalist, they say, yeah, we did not expect this to go the way it went, but we're so proud. I mean, they're amazing because they give so many scholarships, and the girls from my orphanage, the success rate is 100%.
That's amazing. And you're the first foreign anchor woman broadcasting on the 8 p.m. news in the history of Italian TV. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely.
And then you went on to write, is it 5 books now?
Yes. But before that, I had my political TV show where I interviews I was interviewing people from Hamad al-Baradei, Hans Blix during the War on Terror, WMD, to Prime Minister Berlusconi, to Prime Minister D'Alema, to other Prime Minister Prodi. So like I was interviewing, and my style of interviews was like really hardcore questions. So my claim to fame in Italy came with a Berlusconi interview, because what didn't he? I mean, most people don't prepare for interviews in Italy, and they are scared to touch the most powerful man in the media. And he was not only the prime minister; he owned every TV network and controlled the other one because he was a prime minister. And my questions were like, why did you say Islam is an inferior civilization? He said, I never said that. So like, okay, I have a video. Do you want to see it? And like he would panic and then would go back. But back and forth, I remember I asked the director of the studio to zoom on his face. And I remember the sweating. And I thought, oh my God. And I remember that in my ear, there was like the voice of my director. He said, maybe you should slow down now. Our career is over. Like we're done. Actually, they didn't realize it was the beginning, because it changed the style of how people, especially women, Italy is also strangely one of the most misogynist countries in Europe. So for them, a Black Palestinian woman interviewing in a very, not submissive way, the prime minister, was a shock.
Yeah. You once said, I hope I get this right, if your fear is more important than people who are dying, you are in the wrong job. You need to
Yes.
go sell ice cream. If you want to be loved, go sell ice cream. If you want to be in this business, journalism, which is under the spotlight of public opinion, you need to be bold and brave and stand out for what's right, not popular. You've clearly lived that. You've demonstrated that constantly. But what gave you the courage to kind of have that approach?
I was alive. I had a voice. I had privileges. I left so many people who were smarter than me and probably brave and talented. But because they were born Palestinians, the wrong bullet took them. They were basically killed by the Israelis, or they were rotting in jails. So I needed to speak for them, for the living and for the dead. And I thought, what do I have to lose? A job? I'll find another one. I might not find the one I want exactly, but I'll find another one. And if that means I'll open a pizza place and I'll sell pizzas, fine. But at least I kept my integrity. And that was always my motto. But then I met these brave journalists. I mean, I met Mary Colvin in Syria, who was killed by the Assad regime. And I'm like, she was the fiercest woman I ever met in my life. She scared me. I was like, I thought I was really brave. She was by far braver. I met Jamal Khashoggi, who was chopped up into pieces in an embassy. He walked into that embassy out of faith in humanity. I wouldn't have done it, but I was shocked to hear the details of how he was butchered. So I always thought, it's not that we are born strong. The storm transforms us into strong women and men, and how you want to shape your life. I am sure I could have had much more influence and power and probably wealth if I sold my principles. But in the end, it wouldn't have been me. It's like I would have been dead. I just wanted that freedom that we are given. If you don't enjoy it by exercising your freedom to tell the truth, what's the point? What's the point? I mean, I always think, what is going into their heads of these people in the most powerful offices in the land, in the White House, in the State Department, whatever, to be so afraid that they are willing to give their agency, give up their agency, and they know the truth. They do know the truth. They're not idiots. Yet, because of the next job and the next position and whatever, for me, that is shock. This is the ultimate betrayal of yourself. And if you are not willing to be faithful to your ideals, then you're a mercenary.
When we were doing research on you, the team came to me and they said, Ed, we've never seen anybody be able to spit out data and numbers and facts the way Rula has been doing it. Are you just naturally a reader? Are you naturally inquisitive?
We didn't have television growing up in the orphanage. I always read, but also I learned something early on from one of my teachers, who was this amazing, humble Palestinian woman who lost her husband at 30, and she had 5 kids, and she went to school with her children, and she was so smart. She became a teacher later on, but the way she started, she asked Hind Hussein to take her in and her children, and she would clean the school. And from that moment, she actually would sit in the classes together with her children. She got the degree, and she graduated, I think, when she was in her late 40s. And I remember, this is when I met her, and I remember her, one of the biggest lessons she gave me is like, whatever you say, back it with data, information. It's like, whenever you talk about an issue that is very important, but it's important to back it with numbers and data. And she said, numbers are a very important weapon, because it gives people the idea of how much of a certain things cost in terms of human lives, or in terms of money and whatever. And it gives a different depth to the conversation. And I always thought that was a great way of teaching. I remember in the school where we grew up, Dar Tifel, they would make us debate each other. And I always lost the debates. But I learned one thing, how to understand the weakness of the opponents. And the best opponents I ever had, people that used the arguments and backed them always with facts and data and numbers and other things. And I always thought, wow. And this is when I decided that every morning I would wake up, wash my teeth, have my coffee, and I'll start reading.
And that's the complete opposite of the rest of the media, right? I mean, they don't back it up with any numbers. If it is, they're usually fake numbers or incorrect numbers. And I think that's a segue really to media bias. And you've been at the forefront of standing up against media bias. You've called people out very directly. I know you lost opportunities. I think you got canceled before getting canceled was a thing even.
Yes.
Yeah.
The first cancel culture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you were the first one. Just talk about media bias and how, because you're still fighting that. It's very clear. It's still there. How are you handling it now? Or what should our audience know about it?
You know what's amazing? Social media is a new phenomenon, but it transformed everything, because now we live in an aquarium. Everything is visible. They can have their biases, but they will be called out by millions of people on social media. So I don't know if it's convenient anymore. Maybe 10 years ago, I remember one of the Gaza wars, 2014, where like the way they would interview Netanyahu clearly was lying. I thought either they're ignorant or they basically, choosing to self-censor, which is even worse than censoring others, self-censor. But because the conversation, and I think this is how we ended up with big lies that destroyed lives, like WMD, Iraq of weapons of mass destructions. Anybody that went to Iraq knew that there's no weapons of mass destruction. Anybody that read the UN reports, Hans Blix and al-Baradei, any report, while American media and led by the New York Times, legitimized lies that killed thousands of Americans and hundreds of thousands of Middle Easterners, millions. So I am intolerant to lies because I know the cost of lies. And now they're waking up when Trump actually started using them against Americans. Like, oh, I'll use lies and weaponize lies against you. And then we saw January 6th. But you know what? If you dehumanize people to such extent and level, like the media is doing with the Palestinians now, history will not forget. Everything is filmed. Everything is remembered. I think in years to come, a lot of people in the media will be shamed the way the media in Rwanda was shamed. That is a stain you cannot wash. You cannot wash that stain. I remember an interview on CNN when a politician, Jayapal, was saying 15,000 children were killed, women and children. And the woman who was interviewing her said, at least they were not raped. Let me repeat. At least, they killed, they're dead, they don't exist, but at least they didn't rape them. And I thought, oh my God. That's a moment where I thought, wow. I thought the level of prejudice, racism, hatred for Palestinians reached a level that When somebody's telling you 15,000 babies died, you're telling them, but the babies were not raped. I thought we're reaching a level of where persuasion and propaganda is the most important tools and instrument for genocide, together with weapons. The weapons are killing us directly, but the propaganda is facilitating that process to kill us. When you don't see human lives in terms of human lives, that you have to add additionally, they're lucky. We killed them. We did not rape them. I thought, what happened to that person? What happened to their humanity? That they're unwilling to see the catastrophic loss of life. And I felt sad because that video will stay there forever. That person will be remembered for that moment. And I think history will not look kindly at them, will not forgive them over that. And they can claim that everybody's attacking them because anti-Semitic and people yelling at them and they can hide or whatever. But in the end, I think what they did in Iraq by laundering the propaganda that allowed the Iraq war, what they're doing now is what the genocidaires in Rwanda did, especially the media. Remember, in Rwanda, the media, Radio Rwanda, was used to enable the genocide in Rwanda. We have something very similar happening now with the US media, very similar. They might not call to kill Palestinians directly, but they're creating the narrative that Palestinians are disposable, they're all terrorists, they're all subhuman, they're all guilty for something that's done by someone else. So collective criminalization. And this is how you end up with mass extermination and accepting the mass starvation as well.
And you have the Vice President of the United States making clearly ridiculous comments that have been disproven many times. And I know you've tried to reach out to her, if I understood correctly as well. What is your thoughts on her?
Look, I not only try, I talked to her surrogate, people who are very close to her, and they know exactly what I think. And I had that conversation on multiple occasions because I wanted her to understand that as if she wants to win this election and to have the vote of, progressives, people who care about international humanitarian law, Muslim American, Palestinian American, she has to commit to defending international law and enforcing America's law. She doesn't have to declare from one side or another. We are not asking her to become overnight pro-Palestinian. We know that she goes to AIPAC. We know she says, she's always been a fan, and she, in her own words, says that she is, fine. And we're not asking her as people to, to overnight to change whatever stance. But she's running as prosecutor, right? And if you're running prosecutor but running away from international law, what does that say about you? Where you continue to embrace and endorse a policy that is one put in place, not by Biden, by the way, by Trump. Because what Biden did in the Middle East, his Middle Eastern policy, is Trump policy. By saying, Trump is a danger to democracy, why continuing his policy in the Middle East? Why? If you really don't like him or what he stands for and his policies, and he's so dangerous, why would that dangerous policy continue to be your policy? And I think when you confront them with these uncomfortable truths, they live in a bubble and they live in an echo chamber. And I saw some of the people around her that are basically, on Twitter, but also on social media, de facto endorsing genocide or justifying war crimes, literally war crimes, by dismissing the whole, Rafah massacres, the Flower massacre, the school massacre, this massacre, Nusraya massacre, all the massacre, justifying Hamas. At a certain point, Hamas is not hiding under 85% of every building in Gaza. Hamas is not intent with children while you're bombing them. Hamas is not behind snipers shooting children in the head. Then when you have clearly scholars of the Holocaust who happen to be also Jews, Arya Neer, the founder of Human Rights Watch, you have Omar Bartov, and you have many others coming out saying publicly, we believe Israel is committing genocide. And you continue to repeat talking points that whether they are unconfirmed or totally debunked, that means you don't want to hear the truth. And it scares me because they're willing to basically gamble the whole election. And you know who's actually challenging them in these states? Is Jill Stein. She is eating their lunch because they are unwilling to commit to upholding, enforcing international law and America's law. I mean, at this point, it's easy to say America is hostage of Bibi Netanyahu.
Yeah, shout out to Jill Stein. She was on the podcast, and we actually saw her at ArabCon in Dearborn yesterday. She gave a talk at the rally, so she's amazing.
Look, she's eating their lunch. She's like, you know, I don't know her. I never talked to her. I know some of her stands, obviously. But if I'm Kamala Harris and I know I have an opponent that is leaking my things, it's easy to say. I mean, how controversial it is to say, I stand by international law. I stand by the application and enforcement of America's law. The fact that you're even shy to say that, the fact that you wouldn't allow on the stage in the DNC any voice that is, whether pro-Palestinian, whether it's a Palestinian voice, it says to a culture of fear that you are so terrified. I mean, we don't have power and we're not scared. You have all the power. Scared of what? Scared of what?
You said something very insightful at one point. I hope I get this right. It doesn't matter if it's a Democrat or Republican. The stance on Israel will never change. Americans believe in democracy domestically, but their foreign policy does not align with their values.
Yeah, and nothing confirms that than the genocidal war in Gaza that is absolutely bankrolled, enabled, and allowed and protected by the United States. I mean, look, I think it's clear that their Middle Eastern policy was always disgusting, excuse my language, and was always racist and was always pro-regimes. I mean, one of the things that I'm always baffled with my friends on the Democratic side was like, oh, we're defending democracy globally. Like, right. Well, you have to explain to me your policies with all these dictators. I mean, even the Abraham Accord itself, right? That they keep bragging about this Abrahamic Accord, What is it exactly? It is an arms deal between the United States and Arab dictators who we know killed people, whether in Yemen and elsewhere. You are willing to give them nuclear technology and weapons that they will use at their discretion in exchange of what? To normalize their relationship with a government that is stand accused of genocide at the ICJ, at the International Court of Justice, that the ICC accused of committing war crimes and crimes against humanity, and that got a ruling on July 2nd that says their colonial project, their illegal occupation is illegal, is criminal. You're willing to discount all of that, dismiss all of that, and it's like, yeah, we won the Abraham Accord because they're peace accord. They're not peace accords. There's no war between these these regimes and Israel. So what peace is it? The peace that in their brain, in their delusional brain, that somehow you can ignore the Palestinians and you can give these regimes what they want and you normalize in a pact against Russia and Iran. That is not called peace.
Yeah.
That's called something else. And Trump, whether we hate him or not, at least he didn't call it, pro-democracy movement for democratization. He's transactional. He said, yeah, I'm selling weapons. I'm happy to sell weapons. I want to buy real estate. His son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who advised it's his vision, the Abraham Accord. The first thing that he said about Gaza, he's like, yeah, we will create this resort on the beach and we'll sell homes and houses. I'm like, people, and he was saying this in Florida. Basically for him, it's like, yeah, Gaza will be destroyed. Israel will reoccupy Gaza and we will create these beach houses and we'll create these villas like Florida, like Miami, on top of these, mass graves of Palestinian children. And guess what? Nobody was shocked in America that he was saying that. But you know what? The global South is waking up. The rest of the world is waking up. And they're looking at America and they're seeing the rotten decline. And it's obvious.
So when we talk about democracy in the US and we talk about free speech, Have you ever seen what you're seeing today? It is free speech except for Palestine. It's a democracy, essentially, except for Palestine.
Yeah.
You see students getting silenced. You see journalists getting silenced.
You know, it's amazing because once you see what happens in Palestine, you cannot unsee it. But there's certain, I mean, and it sometimes shocks me when people like Hakeem Jeffrey. Yeah, Habibi, your name is Hakeem. It's an Arabic name. And you look like an Arab, like any Palestinian can look. You look like my cousin. And you really go and talk about Israeli democracy and we stand with Israel, whatever. If he lived in Israel, he would be living in Hebron and treated like, you know, basically colonial subject. He would be treated the same way they would treat him under Jim Crow. But they're unwilling to say anything. And you see, you know, other Black African Americans who are willing to say, repeat the colonial narrative about Palestinians are not ready to have a state. It's the same thing that was said about Africans and about Indians and about Haitians and others. It's just a disgusting continuation of that language. But if you would say the same thing about Palestinians that would say it about African Americans, you'd probably be accused of inciting hatred and of being racist. Rightly so. But they're willing to talk about us the way Trump talked about Haitians, and they ignore it completely. And they think it's normal because look even at when an American Palestinian or an American Muslim is killed by Israel, the way it's treated versus when an Israeli American killed by Hamas or anywhere in the Middle East. I mean, the value of life. Shireen Abu Akleh was a great journalist. She was shot in the head by a sniper, and they would not receive her family. I remember talking to her brother Antoine, and he was horrified by the fact that the ambassador kept telling him, we're under pressure. It's like he was begging him, please, like, please, we're under pressure. What pressure, Habibi? Like, what pressure? Multiple investigations showed that she was murdered, executed in cold blood by a thug soldier with weapons that were delivered by the Americans. Americans continue to be hypocritical even with the lives of their own citizens. And I think undermining their own national security. I mean, if there's a moment where the security establishment is screaming, saying, we're seeing radicalization across the world, hatred towards America, worse than Iraq, and they don't care because they're too terrified of that thug sitting in Jerusalem. But Netanyahu, Ben-Gvir, you know who's the real president who controls America's foreign policy in the Middle East? Actually, I think it's the Israeli cabinet. Not even the cabinet. It's just some ministers. I mean, we have Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, Netanyahu, and others who basically are bullying Western leaders to submissions and succeeding. I mean, we have Yossi Cohen, the former head of the Mossad, who threatened to kill the former ICC prosecutor. And he said, I worry for you and your family if anything would happen. I was like, who talks like this? Thugs, mafia. And this is the way they've been acting for a long time. And I must say, kudos to South Africa. They're really claiming international law as their own and teaching a lesson to all these democratic countries. You are really not democratic when it comes to the issue of Palestine. And I'm loving this moment because this is a huge seismic shift between the global north and the global south. And emerging powers are emerging. And I think the Palestinian question and cause is becoming an international quest for freedom from any oppression, freedom from racism and supremacism and militarism. And it's really creating a coalition of people that speak hundreds of languages who believe that we are all born free. And it is beautiful to watch.
You said something along the lines of the arc of history is long, but always bends towards justice.
That's not mine.
I know that's not yours, but it's one of your favorite quotes, I would say.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Do you really believe that at this point, given what you're seeing?
Yes. So this summer, friends of mine were in Bosnia to commemorate, obviously, the survivors and the victim of the genocide. And during that commemoration, every survival, every activist, they were holding Palestinian flags. If you go to Bosnia, in every home, there's a Palestinian flag. On the bridge that was destroyed, that was rebuilt, basically, and it was rebuilt with the stones that dropped in the river. They took the stones one by one and rebuilt the whole bridge. It's just a symbol of resilience and survival, whatever. On that bridge for 80 days, there was a long Palestinian flag. And all my friends who visited would send me videos and pictures and others. And I remember it's just the kind of solidarity we're getting from the global South, from people around the world. When you see a Palestinian minister elected with a Spanish government, she is Spanish and Palestinian. When you see a Palestinian French elected to the European Parliament, she was a refugee from Sabra Shatila. How can I not have hope? Many of us will die, and we will have to survive to remember their memory and make sure that never again for everyone, not only for us, that Gaza can never happen to anybody else, because Gaza is a symbol of failed Western civilized nations, but also it's the revival of the global South. It's a revival of humanism that connects people beyond race and religion. It connects them really, those who stand, on the side of legality and humanity and dignity and freedom, and those who will always enable genocide, ethno-nationalism, fascism, ultimately.
And speaking of that, you have a lawsuit against you right now.
Three
lawsuits. Oh.
The Prime Minister, the Vice Prime Minister of Italy, Salvini, the Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, and the Vice President of the Italian Parliament, Rampelli. 3.
And basically they're just afraid of you? Is that all it is?
I don't know. I didn't know that I was that influential. I think they're insane. I don't know what they're thinking. I mean, like, why waste your time over tweets? By the way, the judge tried to dismiss one of the cases, but then they objected to the dismissal because it's ridiculous. So I have to go to the cases. But the funny part about all of this, if I may elaborate on one of the cases, all of them are tweets. So last February, there was a huge fascist rally in Italy with a fascist salute. Hundreds of those people on video performing the fascist salute. And they belong to this organization called Casa Pound. Well, the Vice President of the Parliament, who is one of the founder of Meloni's own party, is like el padrino of her party, or like one of her close allies, goes to that commemoration in the morning. So I read about it from actually Reuters, and I see the videos, and I see multiple videos, multiple angles. So in the morning, there was a commemoration of a ceremony of some fascists who were killed, I don't know, some years ago. He goes to the commemoration. In the afternoon, there was a real rally, a fascist rally with a fascist salutes. And I'm like, okay, he didn't condemn that. He went to the thing. So I tweeted about the event that morphed into real fascist salute. And he said, it's fake news. I was never with these people. These people tweeted, it's like, what are you talking about? You're one of us. And the funniest part, that a month ago, a newspaper in Italy called Domani discovered that he sits on a foundation. He's on the board of this foundation. That foundation has been bankrolling these real fascists. He's been giving them 30,000 euros every year. These people who did the fascist salutes, they're the same people that he said he has nothing to do with. So I don't know what the judge will do, but these are the facts and the elements. Anyway, it's a waste of my time and my money, but I guess they're trying to teach me a lesson. They had no idea who they were dealing with.
They really don't.
They don't.
You're in the US right now though, right?
I am in the US, but I go to Italy very often.
Okay.
And I have to go to Italy in 2 weeks for my court case. I have to appear before the judge in Milan. And I don't know. I mean, it's funny.
I mean, I can't imagine picking a fight with you, to be honest.
I mean, it's honestly, I mean, somebody reached out to me. It's like, why don't you apologize? Somebody very close to that kind of, why don't you apologize to them and really delete these things and they will be okay? I said to the person, it's like, who are you talking to? I mean, I said, you know what? If this will take me years in the courts, we will stay years in the courts. If they want to retract, I'm fine. If they want to drop the case, but I think ultimately the judges will decide, like, this is ridiculous. I mean, my lawyer is concerned that we might face some judges who are right-wingers. I don't know. I hope they will just comply with the law.
What will happen to you, assuming worst case?
Well, Meloni is trying to pass a law that journalists who defame politicians can get some jail sentence. So I don't know by the time we end this. Sometimes you need to pay the money. I mean, in the case of Salvini, he's asking for money, defamation and money. Somebody was condemned recently for calling Meloni for her height. She's short. They called her short. I don't know if they use the right word, short, or use another word. She was condemned to pay Meloni 5,000 euros.
Wow.
Well, I will go to the Supreme Court than paying these people anything.
And you're extremely busy. You wear many hats right now. Would you mind talking about your teaching and other roles that you have right now?
Well, I'm currently writing actually my new book about the destruction of Western credibility, legitimacy, and international law in Gaza. And just, how the last 2 years where these Western leaders going around the world saying we're defending international law in Ukraine, using starvation is wrong. The difference between us and dictators are in the respect of international law. When it came to Gaza, I was like, yeah, those things don't apply here. As if these things are not universal. I mean, if Gaza exposed anything, is the hypocrisy of the universality of international law. It was never universal. It was made only for white people. And nothing symbolized that than the Palestinian issue, but also nothing symbolized that than the sentence from a leader who called Khan, the ICC prosecutor, Karim Khan, and told him, well, don't issue an arrest warrant against Netanyahu because you have to understand this court was made for African nations, for Africa, and for thugs like Putin, not for Netanyahu or Israel. So basically, they really thought the law is a weapon they can use against the enemies and to absolve allies until the global South owned that mechanism and made it its own. And now I think it's using it to adjust that field of legality where it says the universality, we actually, the global South is teaching a lesson on democracy to the global North, telling them, we actually believe in rule-based international order more than you do. You're destroying it in Gaza. You're creating and unleashing barbarism around the world. We will defend humanism, legality, morality. You do whatever you want to do.
When is your book coming out?
I hope in 6 months. I'm working on that. I'm teaching a course. Luckily, it's in the spring, and it's titled Persuasion, Propaganda, and Genocide. When I started the course, it was 5 years ago, and I never thought I would be teaching about my own people. I went from Bosnia to Rwanda, the Yazidi, the Holocaust, etc. Last year was the first year that I have to teach about the Palestinian Holocaust.
And you also serve on the G7, correct? The Gender Equality Advisory Council, is that right?
Basically, yeah, that was for 1 year, and it was with Nadia Murad, who was survivor of the Yazidi genocide, of Denis Mukwege, who won the Nobel Peace Prize because he was the first doctor to create a hospital in Africa for survivors of rape in war zones. And it was 2018. Trump was the president then. I was serving for a European country. But it was a very impressive mechanism, which again, I think it was easier to talk about African nations for these countries. I had a glimpse into the works of the inside, how they would speak about Africa. I was like, they would lecture African leaders. I remember it's like, oh my God, African leaders about democracy and human rights and women's rights and legality and what you use in wars and what you don't use in wars, whatever. And then that same year, I think France gave Sisi, the Egyptian dictator, the highest Légion d'honneur, which is the highest honor, state honor, and because he was buying their weapons. And I thought, okay. I mean, we always knew that their foreign policy is racist and colonialist, but now it's very obvious that it's genocidal, ultimately genocidal. There's an incredible speech of the former prime minister and former foreign minister of France, Dominique de Villepin, who was on national television saying, Gaza is the biggest scandal on democracy. The West is complicit, but also the West is silent and absent. And I remember meeting him in Paris. He opposed the Iraq War. I remember meeting him at the time, and he was a hero for opposing George W. Bush Iraq War. That was catastrophic. And I remember seeing that kind of generational leadership, remarkable leadership that was on the right, on the left, is gone, is dead in Europe. And now you have a couple of midgets who are running foreign policy in a very both transactional and criminal.
So you posted something on Instagram less than a month ago, and it was an interview with a settler, and the settler said Palestinian is not an ethnicity, it's an ideology. And
Ideology.
yeah, and I think colonialism gets a bad rap.
Yeah.
I just, when we watched that, we were just thinking, okay, what would Rula say to that?
Well, I would tell her that basically, right, the Nazis thought, Judaism is really an ideology, that you're an infection, a disease on society. This is what the Nazis used to say when they called them, they accused them of spreading diseases, they accused them all kind of, and they thought exterminating them it's getting a bad rap. I mean, again, I really believe that this person is not ignorant that was saying that. She was speaking with fluent, perfect English. She's probably not even Israeli native. She didn't have any Israeli accent. This woman was raised in the United States. So somebody that's raised in a democracy like the United States, if you dig deep, you probably will think that she didn't think Jim Crow is a bad thing. If you dig deeper, you probably think that she would think that Muslims, Black people, and others. I mean, it's what Israel did, for example, even to Ethiopian Jews, right? They brag about saving them, and they went to Ethiopia and rescued them with birth. Guess what? The lowest rate of birth rate of anybody in Palestine and Israel is the Ethiopians. Why? Because for years, and they admitted it, they were giving them Reprovera, which is they gave them medication without their consent, so they can never have children. Why? Because they might have children who look like me, who are Black, who are brown skin. So the racism is deep, and the white supremacist ideology is deeper. That woman was speaking like somebody who would be perfectly comfortable in Jim Crow, Mississippi, Alabama, in any of these places, who would see people hanging from trees and would she think, yeah, fine, probably they deserved it. So when she talks about, I mean, the way it tells you the fact that she felt so comfortable. They feel so comfortable to spread their disgusting racism and genocidal ideology. They speak even, I don't know if you followed those two idiots on that podcast where they're speaking about if Palestinians are like, I want, one button, they will be all erased, whatever. That's normal in Israel. You have a minister who 2 years ago told a Palestinian Israeli leader in the Knesset, in the parliament, said, you are here by mistake. You're present here by mistake. Ben Gurion, 1948, did not finish the job. It is not a coincidence. That sentence, finish the job, is the same sentence used by Bibi Netanyahu in Congress last summer when they clapped 53 times. Finishing the job is equal extermination. Finishing the job is wiping out Palestinians. And the fact that they are so comfortable. I mean, when I go, honestly, I don't go very often, but when I go for funerals because I have relatives, whatever. But the racist, I mean, even at the airport, I don't know if you've ever been there. You arrive at the airport, and I remember very often questions like, did you have plastic surgery? And I was like, no. Why? I asked her why. She said, no, because you're Black, but you have very fine features. Usually they look, and I'm like,
yeah.
I said, excuse me, you understand that we all don't look alike, right? We look different. We have different. And it's like, yeah, but you look very, are you sure you didn't have any? I said, no, I didn't have any plastic surgery, and I don't need plastic surgery. And then sometimes they would ask me, how can an Arab woman They don't call me Palestinian. An Arab woman can afford a bag like this. And I'm like, and sometimes I don't answer because I understand the provocation. And sometimes I answer. It's like, it's called IQ. If you know what IQ is, you're very smart, you work hard, you buy whatever you want. When you're dumb like a goat, you ask dumb questions in an airport. And so I answer in a sassy way. But then and I don't know if it happened also to you, but it happened to me very often. Basically, strip search and cavity search. So when I was a teenager and I'm very young and I used to travel a lot, it was very provocative, but also very aggressive. So you have to take off your clothes. You give them your clothes. They go, I don't know what they do with my clothes. I mean, it's like, it's a dress, simple cotton dress. What do you think I'm hiding in my dress? And then the cavity search. And I sometimes will ask her, it's like, what are you looking at exactly? It's like she spent times like with her hands inside. It's like, oh God. And it's very humiliating and uncomfortable. But with age, I became very confident. It's like, did you find anything there? Like, tell me the treasures like that you're about to find or something else. But then when they saw that I didn't react the same way, for example, it changed. They stopped doing it they basically, like when they would ask me before, I was very shy in my 20s. In my 30s, like, sure, let's get this done. And then I remember that woman was looking into my face and she said, wow. I said, excuse me? She said, clearly you are doing a lot of sports. I said, look, what are we doing exactly here? Then when she realized that I called her out she realized it, and then she backed off because they're really used to use their power to humiliate and dominate and control or whatever. And I think they really love to create I don't know, there's something psychologically off. And now, when I go back and I see my cousins and they tell me even horrid stories, or one of my cousins after the war, I mean, she was working in a hospital and she would go back and on her cards, like death to Arabs, kill them all, whatever. And then she found out because she put a camera that it was her neighbor. And I thought, there's something really very disturbed of people who cheer up for the murder of children, who think that murdering children will keep them safe. And I think they live in a delusional reality where genocide is becoming even glamorized.
Yeah.
I mean, they're like glamorizing the killing on social media. And the world is looking at this with disgust. And they're looking at it, and I think they don't see the world anymore. They're incapable of seeing what's happening outside.
Are you able to speak to Afro-Palestinians at all? That's a
Yeah.
that's a topic that, I don't believe it has been studied very much. I think
No,
Sal
it
Beydoun
hasn't.
maybe wrote an article about it, and this is actually
I think Mark Lemon Hill wrote a book about it.
did he? Okay.
Yes. And he spent time with my community in East Jerusalem. Yes. He really visited, and it was amazing because I think he was shocked. But also Ta-Nehisi Coates met a lot of people in my community, and now his new book is coming out. It's going to be about Israel and Palestine. Look, this is the most celebrated African-American writer, and who visited Palestine and was shook to his core to see apartheid South Africa, Jim Crow, all combined. He's the only writer that wrote about the DNC, disgusting exclusion and censorship of Palestinian voices. And it's beautiful. It's beautiful. His writing is so important. Speak of the conscience and the collective struggle for freedom. When you're a Black Palestinian, you're a visible target because of your skin. But the really sick part is, so you have these colonialists who came from Europe and the United States, who come there, claim they're owners of the land or whatever. And I think really they believe, like those old colonialists, when it comes to Black Palestinians, as if they own us. I mean, this is my experience. I mean, when I saw in my community, the attitude of the soldiers was more, I obviously Jim Crow wasn't there when I was born, but if I would think how a white supremacist would act in a space where there's Black people, a sense of ownership. He owns the land, he owns the people on the land. And that's my feeling when it comes to how they deal with us. And the only time I felt free of that equation at the airport, because that's the only time, obviously, I have to deal with authority. It's when I wouldn't allow them the privilege to intimidate or break my space. Like, you want me naked, I'll do naked. It doesn't shame me, it should shame you. And then when she was like commenting on the muscles, on my muscles, I throw it back in her face. And that's the moment where, and I said to her, it's like, I don't want to be offensive, but are you a lesbian? Because maybe you should not do this, because this is, morphing into abuse. And like, it's like, Nana, what are you trying to say? I said, look, from your body language, I can see that you're attracted. So I don't know. I think you really need to work on this. If you want to be in this line of work, you're dealing with smart people who understand, human connection.
Yeah.
And I think it just blew her mind. But again, I think it was an important moment of agency, even in that distressed position.
What about the treatment? We know the settlers, the Israelis, they mistreat the Afro-Palestinians, but what about the treatment of
Palestinians?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that's something that's not talked about a lot. It should be.
It should be, I think. I think, like in every society, probably we have racists, and we have still, we're still like any other society around the world. So probably we have more liberals and more racists and more others. But it's just incredible if you go from Haifa to Akka to Jenin, there's a lot of Black people. Then you go to Gaza, and there's a bunch of, blondies. And so I noticed that there's different treatment depending if you're a big city and or small village and whatever. But we're like any other nation. I think we have our own issues, and we never really address them. Probably we talk about the structural racism of the state, then the social racism among our society. But one thing is incredible. In this struggle for freedom, the people who led the struggle for a long time, the first prisoner was a Afro-Palestinian woman, Fatima Barnawi. Then you have Ali Jadde and Mahmoud Jadde and others who became intellectuals and led the fight. Their color was not an obstacle. Actually, a lot of people in our Palestinian movement are very proud that Black Palestinians led the way. I mean, Fatima Barnawi became the head of the police in Gaza for the women police, and then she was celebrated. Yes, she was imprisoned and got out and exchanged, whatever. But I think the equalizers is that we are all oppressed under Israeli occupation. What will happen after, in the aftermath, I think that oppression somehow liberated us from those, useless dynamics. The one space that it's still, I think, where you can feel that there is the issue of race is marriages. When a Black boy wants to marry a white girl, or a white girl want to marry a Black boy, whatever, or white boy I remember when some of our friends from the Christian community would come visit us and would tell us, like, we don't have, because it's every religion marry within their religion, right? So we don't have the there's no multi-religious marriages. We had like one case or two cases where she was Muslim, he was Christian, and like the whole family, but it became a drama. So it's probably the same layer of white and Black. Less visible. I think it's more invisible, more subtle. The religious part is more visible and more clear to everybody else. I think it's more the religious racism and segregation trump probably the racial one, the color.
No, I appreciate that. I've thought about even doing an episode specifically on Afro-Palestine.
You should.
Yeah.
You should, and I'll put you in touch with my community in the old city, but also in Haifa. I don't know if you went to Haifa to Akka. When you go to Haifa, Akka, Jaffa, it's like in the old cities of those big cities, it's like they're all Black. But there's a Black tradition in the Palestinian community, especially in the north, that is so beautiful, like radical Black tradition of these incredible women, who are lawyers, who defended basically a lot of political prisoners. And then, the feminist movement in the north and the political movement is basically led by women, and many of them are of color.
Yeah. So you wrote a phenomenal novel called Miral. I hope I'm saying that correctly.
Yes.
And
Yes.
you made it into a movie, and I think Hind was a big inspiration for that movie, or the novel altogether. I found it a bit fascinating because you know very well in our culture, we don't, so to speak, air our dirty laundry. We don't share all of these intimate details. Even more so in a conservative sense for women, you don't share any of that.
No.
You had the
A lot of my family members were angry, especially the older generation.
you had the courage to do it. At what age did you do it? And just I'm just
Yeah.
fascinated with that process.
So I was 30 and I was working on Italian television, but also I was covering the Iraq War. And I remember watching a lot of videos of massacres, many of those massacres. And, Americans want to liberate Iraq and they were like butchering Iraqis. But also, I remember the dehumanizing language that was used against Iraqis, liberate the barbarians, like the whole thing, including, people in the New York Times who said, it's not about 9/11, it's about going to these people with a big stick and tell them, suck on this. And I was like, yeah, that was exactly what's happening in Iraq. But also, one of the scenes that shook me was, I don't know if you remember when they stormed the Iraqi museum. The Museum of Baghdad was one of the most beautiful museums in the world. It really had world heritage and history, the Mesopotamia, and on all these amazing sculptures and pieces of art that belong to our collective human history, about our past. One of the reasons why the fascists love to erase the past is to control the future and the present. And that moment, I thought, there's so many people who influenced my writing, but also my thinking. And I read novels that really uplifted me and shaped me, but also had a huge role in forming me as an intellectual. Hasan novels, going back to Haifa, Men Under the Sun, so many. But there's one novel that stayed in my psyche, Gate of the Sun, Ilyas Khouri, who died today, by the way, who passed away, who I met in Beirut. And I was fascinated by his stories about humanizing Palestinian refugees in Beirut, in all the refugee camps that I visited. So I was burned out. I got, like years of working on the war on terror, whether it's Afghanistan and then Iraq. And then when the Iraq, started blowing up, I went to visit a friend of mine. She was living in Sicily. And I remember she hosted a dinner. And at that dinner, she had the Iraqi architect, Zaha Hadid, who was designing, she designed the Iraqi parliament for a few. I said to her, what parliament? The Bush parliament? She's like, no. For future of Iraq, when the Iraq will be again sovereign state, nation, country, I will give this as a gift to the next government. I was like, oh my God, she's already believing and thinking about the future. And she was telling me about her story. Her family is from Beirut, but also from Iraq. They lived in Beirut. And it was a fascinating story of this Arab, amazing Muslim woman, because a celebrity, an icon in architecture around the world. And I told her the story of Hind Hussein, and she said, you should write a book. So I start writing the book. I start writing it as a novel. Every chapter has a name of a woman who shaped my life. And I finished it in 2004, came out in 2004. It's already 20 years ago. I was scared to put it as like an authentic story. So I put it as a novel because I made my sisters read it. My aunt start crying, saying, why you're doing this? It's shameful. Why? And actually it was two people who I trusted and loved. Ilyas Khouri himself, who said, you need to be as honest as possible. Truth will liberate us, he used to say. And then my closest friends who I loved and adored, and they were like my mentors in the Italian television, these strong women. And again, the same message came clear. And my sister, Rawia was like, Rula, if you want the people to take you seriously, you need to take seriously this story and explore all the elements with honesty. And you need to tell the truth if you want this to succeed. And in 2008, I met the producer, John Killick, and he asked me if I could write a screenplay, and I did. In 2010, the movie came out. 2011, we premiered at the United Nations at General Assembly. It was the first time a movie premiere is held at the United Nations. I remember the Israeli ambassador went crazy and start accusing us of all kind of shenanigans. Luckily, the producer was Jewish, somebody else was Jewish, because it was Jewish, Palestinians, Israeli, Americans. It was just, and we all were humanists. And I remember they wrote him letters, but also I remember at the United Nations, the look in the face of many diplomats who were invited, the people who really came out there to help, endorse the movie. I remember Robert De Niro with his African-American wife, Grace Hightower. I remember him sitting next to me with his two sons who are Black African-Americans. Like, can you talk to them about what does it mean to be Black Palestinian in Palestine? They need to know. And it was an incredible journey. And I think this is the best thing I ever written.
No, it's powerful. It just, again, I'm amazed. You've done so much. I mean, and then he wrote a novel and then a screenplay. I mean, how does that work? I mean, that's just phenomenal. But when I kind of did the research on the novel and the movie, the one question that kept on and kind of popping up in my head was, what would Rula tell her younger self if she had a chance today?
Honestly, if I would go back, the main mistake for a while was fear, truly fear, because I wanted my community and my family to be proud. I should have written Miral as soon as I arrived to Italy. I waited actually almost 12 years. I should have liberated myself from the social construct that you cannot write about complicated stories and crimes and struggles and aspirations in a way that somehow keep the sensibility, but at the same time convey an important story. I think the power of Ilyas Khourir's writing is his total freedom as a man to narrate a love story between a man and a woman in a cave. And I remember reading that book when the woman was arrested by the Israelis. She would have babies with this guy who was her husband, but because he was a fugitive, she couldn't. And her community, after 1948, and I think it gave me power. That story that she goes to the police, the arrest her, like, so who are these babies? You're having all these babies. Your husband's supposed to be a fugitive. I mean, clearly you're collaborating with him. We will start torturing you until you tell us where is he. And she said, I don't know where he is. And then she says the world. She said, I'm a loose woman. These babies are not his. And I remember, imagine a conservative Palestinian society in the 40s, the 50s, in a refugee camp. But Ilyas Khourir, with that sentence, I think wanted to empower us to be free of the social construct of, when you're under occupation and under a military dictatorship, not only survival, but tell the truth and real stories is so important, because I believe that there's so many books that narrated very well the Holocaust and made the world empathize with Jews in a way. I mean, if you look at Exodus, that movie, it created the most important tool of empathizing with Israelis. And I think it was a brilliant way, because, and after that, Schindler's List and others, we need the arts to speak of our universal rights, but also of our plight, of our trauma, of our pain, of our suffering, of how terrorized and brutalized we are. We need to humanize the Palestinian story. And this cannot be only through articles, podcasts, interviews on television, this should be through the one tool that everybody understands: arts, literature. I believe that the role of arts, literature is a universal language, but also it's an important, powerful tool to make the world, not only empathize, but also try to see themselves in your own shoes. And I think when you depict the story of Miran and Hind Husseini, I mean, I have this dream actually to make a movie about Hind Rajab, the 6-year-old sitting in a car, calling, crying, saying please, begging for her life, saying which with her eyes we saw what's around her, and then we failed to save her. That is a documentary, that is a movie, that is a novel. And I think that novel should never die. For years, Hannah Arendt and other Jewish intellectuals described their plight during the Holocaust. Primo Levi and all these secret letters of these girls who were hiding during the Holocaust. What about our girls? What about our little girls, babies, who have the courage, summon the courage in a car full of dead people to call and leave her voice so we can carry this voice forth?
Did you get a chance to watch the Al Jazeera Fault Lines documentary on Hind?
I did.
You did? Yeah.
I did. I think it was great. I think, look, a lot of the times I have trouble watching things done by non-Palestinians. I don't mean to discriminate. I truly believe we have talented people who should be empowered to absolutely tell our own stories, because some details are always missed. And I see this like every time there's any TV show about Palestinians and Israelis, like, oh God. And I remember when we were doing the movie Miran, they would call me to rooms like, this is where we're going to shoot. Is the room right? Is the decor right? Is the furniture right? Is the dress, the way they're dressed, right? Is the accent right? So you oversee a movie, and to make it as authentic as possible, you have to have the native people who know the story very well. Yesterday, for the first time in American, basically entertainment industry, a TV show in Japanese about Japan called Shogun won 18 Emmys. Why did they win the Emmys? Yes, the performance was great, but because for the first time, somebody was brave enough to tell the Japanese, tell me your story from your point of view. Give me the exact customs at the time. Give me the mindset, the story from your standpoint of view. And I wish we have this with Palestine, because that would be the most powerful story. Oh. And it's a story that's not been told yet.
So just a last couple of questions for you. I have daughters who are 8-year-old, they're 8 years old, they're twins. And I often ask, the question was really going to be, what would your message be to young women in Palestine, in Gaza, in the world, in generally speaking? But I think that's selling you short. I think the message is, what do you have to say to the women or the girls and boys who are looking up to you and your accomplishments? Because I think that's the real story.
They can be by far better than me. The world is theirs to conquer. Hind Husseini raised thousands of girls, and all of them were 1000% successful. I think our job is to deliver to them the possibilities, the opportunities, the freedom that they deserve, so we can unleash their potential. I believe that, when I talk, we need to speak and work for the living and the dead, because we need to create a future where those girls, have a world, a homeland that for now it's in our aspiration and our dreams, right? Before that homeland is liberated, we need to save. And that's why I started a scholarship program. When I went to the refugee camps in Beirut and I visited, and I saw that, all of these incredible young women and were there, and I think they were smarter than I will ever be. more read than it will ever be. And they were talking to me about Kafka. And I'm like, when did you read Kafka? And she was 16 or 17. I'm like, they took me to a library where they had like books like full of dust. They didn't have much, but they were like holding these books that they were holding the most sacred, the most, gold. And I knew they belonged to the future. I knew I had a duty to be that bridge that Hind built for me and my sisters, that I need to continue that bridge. That was the pledge that we had with Hind, that they would continue that wheel. And the only way I could do it is through education. So I started a scholarship program at the American University in Rome, where I give scholarships to girls from our region, and now to Palestinian girls exclusively. I extended it to Syrians because in that moment Syrians were having a hard time, but now it's Palestinians. And I remember, more than telling them, or forging a path for them, you give them just one chance. And I am confident that these women will exceed and will succeed far beyond anybody's expectations. They just need that one opportunity. I don't know, when I go to refugee camps, I'm so impressed sometimes with the sacrifices of these mothers who really live with nothing. Our Palestinian people had nothing, but they wanted their kids to be educated. We are the most educated nation in the Middle East. The rate of literacy in Gaza was 99%, 93%. The smartest girl in the Middle East was from Gaza. She was killed in December. And I remember when the war started, and there is a video of her with her family celebrating as the smartest. Her grades, high school grades, and I compared it to my high school grades, I was 15% down compared to her. So if I could do that with, I'm saying if she could do that in that terrible circumstances, imagine what she can do in an easier circumstances. And I think that's our duty. That's now our duty. Friends of mine went to Egypt and tried to see what can, how we can save, some of the people and what can be done. And I remember reaching out to the orphanage in East Jerusalem saying, can we please ask the Israelis if we can get some children from Gaza? They declined, they refused. There even was a proposal for the Germans to get some people from Gaza to the West Bank, orphans, babies. And Netanyahu said yes initially and then said no and whatever. But I mean, look, it's clear what the Israelis want to do. For me, it's reoccupation and extermination of Gaza. But we will have many orphans and many survivors. And I think Hind's story is becoming our story and our duty to carry her work.
Absolutely. Any final words? Any other projects? I know you have that book coming out in 6 months. I can't wait to read that, and hopefully you can come back on and talk about it as well if you have the time.
Look, after what I saw yesterday, I think I'd like to start writing actually now, not a documentary, a movie about how people survived in Gaza. What did they, especially women, how did they cook without water, without tools? I mean, I think this is our Schindler's List or any of those movies. We need to start writing these movies because there's a reason why Israel decided a media blackout in Gaza. There's a specific reason. They want us to die in darkness, but the stories are there. And survivors, I remember at the International Court of Justice, that amazing lawyer from Ireland, where she said Palestinians are filming their own extermination in the hope that the world will save them. We know that the world is not coming to save us, but we have to save the testimonies of the people who made those films, because they're trying to tell future generations of survivors, don't forget me.
Yeah. Rula, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud. All about humanity, so this right here for everyone. Uplift, amplify, empower everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud. Listen, stay tuned, cause it's time for Sumud.